Hello everyone, my name is Emma and I'm addicted to orchids. Well, maybe not addicted to orchids, but I really like orchids and I have a collection of quite a few of them. Because of this, I usually like going to orchid shows and looking at even more orchids and taking photos of them and maybe even buying a few, even though I'm really shouldn't buy anymore. But because of the pandemic that's happened, all of the local, regional, and international orchid shows have been canceled. So because of this, another orchid enthusiast by the name of My Green Pets has suggested that we do a global virtual orchid show so that we can bring our orchid collection to all of you guys. So today is Global Virtual Orchid Show Day, and I'm going to show you what I have currently in bloom. First, I'll show you the orchid that started it all. The first orchid I got was a white phalaenopsis, like most other people's first orchids. This orchid was given to me by my boss at the tea house that I worked at. She would decorate tables with orchids when they're done blooming. Like most people, get rid of them. She kept quite a few of them, but then of course she offered quite a few to employees as well, which is how I got this one. And then of course after that I just looked up other kinds of orchids and I figured out that you could order orchids online. So that's really, she's really where my orchid collection really started from. This orchid has been through quite a lot. It's been through quite a few moves. It's been through me trying to figure out how orchids work. It went through an experiment with kiki paste where I almost killed it. But here it is today, the first orchid that I ever had. Next I'll show you a couple of the other phalaenopsis I have in bloom. And one of them is this really nice big petaled orange and pink phal. It's got a really bright white center and it's got some nice pink spots all the way across it. It's a pretty reliable bloomer. It blooms once a year and then stays in bloom for a few months. This is another no ID, so there's no particular name. So if you wanted to get an orchid that was similar to this, it would be hard to do, but I do know this one looks very similar to the Marigold phalaenopsis. Here's another white phalaenopsis. This one has smaller blooms. It's got a little yellow on the inside. This one actually keeps blooming for a really long time off the end, so I put it on this huge stake because it'll just keep on blooming. Here is another phalaenopsis. This one is a lot more yellow than it looks in the video actually. It's a very reliable bloomer, and so much so that this one has actually rebloomed a couple times from the same spike. There's a rebloom right here, and then the main bloom is actually also another rebloom as well. So it's really cool. This one is another no ID phalaenopsis. It's got some really nice pretty spots. It's a very reliable bloomer. It blooms once every year and stays blooming for 3 to 5 months at a time. You can see this one's just started to open up, and it's kind of, when it opens up, it's a lot more yellow, and then as it grows up, the yellow fades a little bit. Here is a few mini phals that I have. You can tell really how small they are. They have compact leaves and a lot shorter stem and shorter flowers. This one, on the other hand, is actually not a mini phal. It's a kiki, or a baby, off of my first orchid that I showed you. And then we have a couple mini phals here. These are actually also both from the tea house. Here we have a nice dark purple one with some white, a little bit of yellow in the lip. And then I also have this mini phal with nice, another brighter purple with some more yellow and spotting on the middle. This one actually has a new spike that's growing up on the side, so it'll bloom into even more flowers pretty soon. Here we have another phalaenopsis acquired from the tea house I worked at. This one is pink with an even darker pink lip. This one has tons of blooms. It's just kind of going crazy. There's even more buds that haven't even bloomed yet on this one. It's really nice to have. Okay, last phalaenopsis that's blooming right now. It's actually potted in a reused tomato basil bisque container with holes punched through it. I actually find these to be really good containers for orchids. The center has like this thing, it kind of looks like a skull in it too. It's kind of interesting. I wonder if you guys see that or not. Now for something completely different, we have Polystachia panuculata. It's a mounted orchid on cork board with moss. This thing is super tiny. It has even tinier little orange and red blooms. It is even smaller than my thumbnail is. This thing is really, really tiny, so I ended up just taking a photo so that you guys can get a look at the blooms. So speaking of small orchids, this is another small one by the name of Maxillera variabilis, Poloei Peach. This one has really tiny blooms. It usually has at least one of these really small blooms on the plant at all times, and sometimes can have a ton of small blooms all over. So staying in the same Maxillera family, here is Maxillera pitca. This is the first time that I am seeing it bloom, and there are 6 buds on this orchid as of today. It has a little bit of purple spots and a little yellow to the blooms. It also has a fairly overwhelming fragrance. It's a nice fragrance, it just kind of is a little heady. But the flowers are really beautiful and really nice to have this one in our collection. Here is another type of orchid. This is a Dendrobium orchid. This one is called Roy Tokunaga. It has very pretty white blooms with some purple stripes and spots. This one has actually been blooming for quite a few months now, and no fragrance on this one, but just a nice orchid to have around. So the next one is actually one of my most favorite orchids because the color on this is so beautiful. It's actually really hard to capture the true color of this orchid in photos or video, but it's got a really nice magenta pink lip with a darker, super glossy petals around the outside. I don't have a name for this orchid, but I have nicknamed it the Valentine's orchid because it is usually in bloom around Valentine's Day, and the lip is kind of a heart shape, and it's just a nice pink color as well. This orchid in particular is a division off of my partner's dad's orchid, so I'm really lucky to be dating him, so I get this orchid in my life. This behemoth and unruly orchid is some type of spider orchid. It has a really cool pattern and design on this orchid, and the blooms on this guy are really, really big. It's as big as my hand is across. And this one is actually also another subdivision from my partner's dad's plants. And this one also has a very slight fragrance. You really have to stick your nose into it to smell it, but it's a very beautiful orchid, very eye-catching, and it even has a tiny little new growth growing up as well. This one is called the Mystic Maze. It's not quite in bloom yet, as you can see, but I do have a photo from a couple of years ago. It has a really crazy bloom. It should be blooming here in the next week or two. It's been blooming around this time of year for the last couple of years, and it's just got a really crazy pattern, so I wanted to show you guys. And last but not least, we have this Paphiopedilum hybrid. I think it's the Beltum hybrid, but I can't really be sure without a tag. This one has a really huge bloom, almost as big as my hands. And the cool thing about Paphiopedilums is they also have really cool foliage. This one has mottled leaves, so even when it's not in bloom, it has really pretty leaves to look at. This one in particular is very tall. And another cool thing about Paphiopedilums is that they are actually kind of fuzzy. They have, some of their petals have a little hair, and then their roots are also hairy as well. This one is one of my favorites and is the last orchid in bloom I have to show you. And that's it. That's all the orchids I have in bloom right now. If you want to see more orchids from the Global Virtual Orchid Show, search for the hashtag GVOS2020. Thanks again. Bye.